Hey man, I have enjoyed racing with you for the last 6 years that we have been here in Wisconsin. You've gotten the best of me a few times, I remember. I enjoyed our time racing together. I want to thank you for all the videos that you do. I watched all your videos, they're great. I'll always say numbers can only go so far. A lot of it is just, a bit of race experience and being at the right time to use our matches. Take care, my friend.
Hey, race fan, Brian Davis races, and you can too. Hey, listen, today's video is super special. I got the data from the race winning move on the Tour of America's Dairyland finale race. So it was a two-man move that went up the road. Carlos put in a lot of the work to establish the break, and then they worked together for a majority of the race, and then Carlos ended up attacking with 3 to go and won the race. I'm so excited that I asked my coach, Zach, to take a look at the data, take a look at my data, and offer everyone in the video some opinions and thoughts about what the break looks like and what the psychology of the break is and what you have to do to get in the break and all these things that we're going to dive into in this video. So definitely stay tuned. Smash the like button or leave a comment with a question or your own thoughts on Breakaway. It's so helpful to have people in our sport that are like Carlos, that are willing to share their knowledge and help people get better and grow our sport, because we love bike racing, but without people racing bikes, it doesn't happen. So share what you know with other people and it will grow our sport, I promise. Carlos, thank you again for sharing this data, and I will miss racing with you, but I'm sure our paths will cross again. And I will leave you with this thought, Carlos. Speed fades, but class is forever. Not my original quote, but I absolutely love it, and I think of it every time somebody is struggling in a group ride. Can I go back and get them? Can I do something to help them grow into our sport rather than trying to shut them out of our sport? And I hope you can think about that too. All right, let's dive into it. All right, Zach, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I have this treasure trove of data from Carlos, and I want to make sure that I can provide some lessons, not only to myself, but anyone else that's watching. So Carlos won the race on Saturday. So he broke away with one other rider. From my explanation from Carlos, it sounds like he did most of the work to establish the break for the first 2 laps, I think he said. And then after that was getting some cooperation from one of the White brothers. And then with 3 laps to go, he pushed the pace and broke away from the White brother to go off on his own and end up winning the race. So my race went differently. So I stayed in the field. I tried to follow 1 or 2 little attacks, but mostly I stayed in the field, and I ended up finishing 16th. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, and Carlos is so gracious to share this information, what are his watts look like? What do my watts look like? And how is he burning his matches versus how I'm burning my matches, and see if there's some lessons that we can take away from that. So I super appreciate you looking at the data for both of us and providing us a glimpse of what the answer is.
Yeah, I was just going through both the files, and it's really interesting because people a lot of time will look at breakaways and they see the average power, and it's something it's manageable. It's something like 320, 330 watts for maybe 10 or 20 minutes. And they were like, yeah, if I was on a good day, I could do something like that. It's really when you look at those key moments of the race when the break was being established and then that winning attack at the end, that you see those numbers and you zoom in on it and you're like, wow, that's a huge number. So I was looking at Carlos's file, and it looked like in the early part of the race, it was kind of all around pretty hard for the first 10, 15 minutes. So about from the second lap to about lap 8 or 9, his normalized power was 371 and average speed of about 25.5 miles an hour. So that's about 30 watts higher than his normalized power for the entire race. So already that first chunk of the race is hard. The brakes are going, attacks are going. He's at the front. He's doing the work too. And then when he did establish that break, there was a 5-minute chunk in the middle of that effort where his normalized power was over 400 watts. I believe it was 402 watts for 5 minutes. And that took about 2 or 3 laps where he averaged about 27 miles an hour. And when you look at the race average was around 25 miles an hour. So that when that brake was going, he was putting at least 5 or 10 seconds into the field every lap. So that brake was really being established kind of in that first chunk right there. And 402 watts it's a big number. So when you're pushing that, and he, like you said, he was doing a lot of the work in the brake, whereas the other rider was kind of sitting on more. Carlos is really, his power is really going to be higher because he's the one sitting on the front most of the time. He's doing the hardest work because he's pulling on the hill and the straight with the headwind. So, and then what's really interesting is after that first chunk of the race, that first 10 laps, the brake is established. He's in the move with one other rider. He's doing a lot of work for the next half an hour. So basically from that point until he attacked at the very end. So that half-hour chunk in the middle of the race, his average power is only 272 watts, which for someone who weighs around 170, 175 pounds, 272 watts is not that high. But that whole time he's maintaining that huge gap to the field. And I was wondering if that was wrong because he's still averaging 25 miles an hour. The brake is still out there. 272 seems pretty low, but his normalized power at that time was 319 watts. Right. So when you look at the work that he was doing each lap, he's pulling really hard into the headwind. He's pulling really hard, like 500 plus watts on the hill. And then he's kind of floating the downhills, floating through the corners. He's kind of coasting there. There's a little bit of a tailwind section. He's sitting in the draft. So that's going to bring that average power way down because if he's coasting for all that time, that's going to bring it way down. But that normalized power of 319 really shows you that the workload was still pretty high during that time. And then after that section, there's about 3 to go. And that's when he puts in this huge attack to get separation from the other breakaway rider. And he did 713 watts for 31 seconds. He pretty much attacked right through the start finish line, kept going around the first corner, and then continued attacking. He kicked again on the hill at 800 plus watts, carried that speed up the hill around the corner, and then from there it was pretty much done. The other rider, I mean, I would have a hard time holding on to that attack. So that was about 9 watts a kilo for 31 seconds after being in the brake for 55 minutes. So that was a huge attack. And I mean, after that, he got the separation and just kind of held the speed until the end.
He times his efforts. So he's got a ton of work in the beginning, a good amount of chunk of work at the end. And like you were saying, that 35 minutes in the middle is pretty mellow, statistically speaking. I think there's a lot to be said for he's just an impressive athlete that can pull off these numbers, but he's also tactically brilliant to use all that power at the right time. So just walk me through normalized versus average, how mine is one way and his is the opposite. Any thoughts there?
Right. So I did a little bit of digging and there's definitely something wrong with your numbers because normalized will always be the same or higher than average. The average should never be higher than the normalized.
Side note here, the reason this discussion came up is we eventually figured out that my power is transmitting left-right power, but in reality, my power meter doesn't have that. It's only one crank arm. So I have a little bit of garbage in my data, but the normalized from my file is accurate. It's the average that gets all messed up because of that left-right thing. So just wanted to point that out. You've been in brakes before. So what is your interpretation of, you know, if I say to you like, hey, Zach, I really want to be in a brake in one of these days, like what needs to be different about how I'm riding the races to make that happen?
Right. So it was really interesting because especially when I put these numbers that I was seeing with the footage that you put on YouTube, I kind of put it together and there was actually at least 2 or 3 opportunities where if you were stronger, if you were feeling a little bit better, sorry to say if you were stronger, but it's true.
It's all right.
But where you made a move and you timed it really well, you got in a group that was a good mix of guys. It wasn't too big. It wasn't too small. You got a significant gap on the field and you got up there. And I was just like, man, if Brian just pulled through at 450 watts for the next 30 seconds, that gap is going to extend. That brake is going to be like, oh, he's motivated. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling motivated too. All of a sudden that brake has 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds. And a lot of times that's how it goes. So getting to the break is kind of one step, and then establishing that break is the next step.
Yeah.
So you've gotten really good in the last probably month or so getting into a break, of recognizing a good group of guys that's going, a motivated group, and you're like, I want to be in that. And then you get there. And then that next step is having probably another 20, 30 watts to make that effort. And then right away, with maybe 1 or 2 seconds of recovery in the draft, being like, okay, I'm ready to pull at 400, 500 watts.
Yeah.
Because when you look at Carlos's file, when he's establishing that break, he gets to the break and then he gets to the hill, he pulls up the hill at 500 or 600 watts. And that's where the gap really gets established. And that's kind of the next step for driving a breakaway. Because I remember at the beginning when I was a junior, I would be really excited and I would get into a break and my heart rate's 190 and I'm like, I'm just hanging on. But then maybe 1 or 2 years later, after a lot more training, a lot more practice, I would get in a move. I'd maybe sit on the back for like a minute. Because if you bridge across, that's another thing. If you bridge across, you're going to be like, guys, I'm tired. I just got here. I need like to skip one rotation. You take that minute or two to recover, and then you go to the front, you start driving it. And a lot of times, if you're strong enough, if everyone else is strong enough, it is complicated because you need a good motivated group to get that gap and maintain it. But once you get it rolling, then that's really where the winning gap is established. So I think that's the next step for you. I was watching the video and I was like, man, he's right there, just like 1 or 2 pulls and that break is gone.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. There were some comments down below in the last video from the Tosa Village, the final race of the Toad series. When they started making that comment, now hearing you, like, yeah, I guess that's true. If I would have given it another 30 seconds, because what I did learn throughout the week is that when those breaks did go up, a lot of times we'd get really close to the field would get really close to bringing them back. And it was honestly many, many times in those last 10, 15, 20 feet of distance that those guys would still be motivated and that would crack the field. Because the guy that brought us up to that 20 feet is like, all right, I got you within 20 feet, for the love of God. Why? I mean, I can't finish this. Somebody else come around. And then that's where it mushrooms out and everybody's like, well, I don't want to finish it. Well, I don't want to finish it. And then whoop, that break just keeps going. So it's fascinating to me. And, I've mentioned this on the channel once or twice, but I've never actually been in a break other than like a solo break when I was a Cat 5. That didn't work either, but I was out there a long time. But this is like a huge goal of mine, like a bucket list kind of thing. Like, I got to get into a break. I don't even care if I win. I just got to get into that move and then experience what Carlos's experience was. I want to have that experience as a cyclist of that. It doesn't necessarily happen in the first 5 laps like he established, but somewhere in there, put in that big effort, commit to the break, pull through, do all the stuff that signifies me being all in, and then have that amount of time of just doing regular work, and then Carlos's choice to attack at the end is just a testament to his strength and strategy as well. So it's interesting.
So I wanted to add one more thing with that. I was thinking of a specific scenario where maybe 2 guys go up the road and then another guy jumps, you're on that guy's wheel and you're starting to go across. So as you're getting across that break, when you start catching that group, when you look back, you have a gap. So you're like, this is a breakaway. What should I do now? As you're catching that group, sometimes you can just use that momentum from catching to just go straight past everyone. You don't even need to attack. You don't need to put in a big spike in power or a big effort. You just use that momentum, come around, and then even though you're not making a huge effort physically, you're just kind of using that speed. That tells everyone in the break, like, oh, he's motivated. Like, this is a breakaway. We're ready to go. And then that first pull, you don't even have to make a huge effort. Everyone else starts coming through, and then you kind of take that second one and just go from there.
That's interesting. So this brings up a thought as you said that, of how much of the break, in your experience being in breaks and working with other cyclists, how much is psychological and how much is physical? Because the reason I bring this up is because I love Carlos dearly and some of those stronger riders, but they all sort of have the same, like, well, you just have to put it in your brain that you're going to do this, which I get where they're coming from 100%. But at the same time, like, that's cool that you believe you can do it, but you actually can also do it. And that's where I'm like, I don't know that I could, like, if I would have gotten in that break with Carlos, used all my 1,000-watt efforts to join Carlos on that break, could I have maintained that 36 minutes? So can I do 325 watts for 35 or 40 minutes? In
Yeah,
theory, I
so
can. But
yeah, it's a really good question because I've definitely been in breaks before where it's a big enough group that maybe one guy is sitting on, and a lot of times you can see their file from after the race, and it's like he's doing 50 watts less than everyone else in the move just because he's sitting on the back the whole time. He's taking the corners exactly how he wants. He's in the draft 100% of the time. So I really think that if you were in that break, you could have definitely sat in the draft and been okay, because it would be interesting to see the other breakaway rider, his power, because it sounded like Carlos was doing a lot of the work. He was pulling in the headwind, pulling on the hill, which on this course was a huge effort. He's pretty much doing 500 or 600 watts up that hill for 10 or 15 seconds every lap. And the other breakaway rider, I mean, you're probably saving at least 100 or 200 watts just because of the draft on a hill like that. And then you come down the other side, it's flowing, and the corners and everything helps with that. So you can definitely be in a move and sit in and save 40 or 50 or maybe even 60 watts, depending on the course and depending on the wind, because actually the windier it is, the easier it's going to be to sit on in a break. Because if you're in a headwind and there's two guys pulling in front of you, they could be doing 400 watts in the front and you're just sitting in 100, 150 watts, maybe just chilling in the draft. But so something like that, you could definitely sit in on that course, because I mean, in the break, most of the time, Carlos was going about 25, 26 miles an hour. That's nothing crazy. If you're in his draft, you're going to be saving at least 50 watts most of the time.
yeah, interesting. Okay. And I agree with you. I think for a writer of, again, back to some of the psychology or the politics at play, I guess if I had joined that group, I know that Carlos would have looked at me as not very threatening, because he can get rid of me as needed. The other writer, I'm sure he had some threats about, especially if it came down to a sprint, the White brothers. So I think that's why he decided, like, I have to do this with 3 to go, or I won't be able to get rid of him, and I have to make it extremely painful to create that separation. I'm curious. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm curious. I mean, I saw Carlos with his hands in the air, but I don't really recall how far back Ryan was, or if Ryan was even in the shot. But I know it was definitely not coming down to a sprint. If it was Ryan, whatever, one of the White brothers, I get them confused because they're twins. Who knows? In your point about sitting in on a break, in your experience, how does that work out for the person sitting in? Is that a negative experience, getting yelled at, or are they trying to get rid of you if you're sitting on, or how does that play out?
Right. Yeah. I think my feelings have definitely changed over the years, because I mean, in my first year or two of riding, you're a junior, you're young, everyone else is older, everyone else is more experienced. So if they yell at you, you're like, I'm doing something wrong. But then as I've grown up, as I've gained more experience and been in real breakaways, it's like, if you're sitting on in a breakaway and you make it to the finish in the winning breakaway, then you were right. It doesn't matter if you got yelled at, because I mean, it's a race. I mean, right. You're trying to get the best result for you. The other guys are mad because you're trying to beat them. And they're like, well, if he sits on, he could beat me in the sprint and I'm going to be mad. So if you're sitting on and getting yelled at, of course, it's like they want you to do more work because they want you to help them. So of course, they're going to try to get a little bit more out of you. And yeah, what you were saying about the psychology of the breakaway was really interesting, where when I was getting in breakaways a few years ago, I wasn't quite as strong. So I was getting in a break and I was just hanging on. So in those breakaways, I was kind of doing the calculations in my head. I was like, we're halfway through the race. There's a breakaway of 4. If I sit on, I might win the sprint. I might podium, but we might get caught because I'm going to sit on. The brake's going to get mad. We might not work together as well. But for some races, for bigger races, if I was at Cascade and I was in a break of 5, and I was like, if I do work in this breakaway, I really think we're going to have a good shot to make it to the finish. If I do work, I'll probably get dropped in the sprint because I'm so tired, but I'm going to be super happy with 5th on a stage. Right. So like if you got in this breakaway with Carlos and you're like, if I pull through, we have a really good chance to make it. They're going to destroy me in the last couple laps, but am I happy with 3rd? And I would be like, yeah. I'll be super happy with that. So that's another thing to think about, is when you're in a break, if you do pull through, you might be sacrificing your chances to win, to be tired at the end and win the sprint. You might be sacrificing that. But if you get last in the break, sometimes that place is better than anything you could have done if it was a field sprint again.
Yeah. Any thoughts, just because I know Carlos in his texting was mentioning some things about RPM. Any thoughts about that and climbing that short, spiky little hill that we had at this particular, I know you didn't race the course, but I think you saw my video footage, so you can get a sense of that ramp up there. Any thoughts on using RPM or any other tactics to try to minimize the pain?
Yeah, it's been interesting because even personally, I've experimented with this a lot, and with research and reading and learning about what the pros do, what amateurs do. Cadence is really one of those things that it's really individual. I've never seen any science to back that up, but for me, it feels better to ride at a higher cadence most of the time and then save those really like muscular, strong efforts for when I need them the most.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So I will tell a little secret here about Carlos's training. So hopefully I'm not stepping out of school with Carlos, but I don't think I am. His approach has changed a bit over the years, but from what I understand, his approach to it now is to do really, 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 really slow work, base building, low wattage stuff. And then he does, as I understand it, maybe one group ride or a race per week. And that's his significant effort. But everything else is super, super easy going. So I think that's, obviously putting another check in the polarized approach, because Carlos flat out wins races. So it's been interesting, as I alluded to in the videos too, going back and forth from Milwaukee so many times this week, hearing a bunch more podcasts and just getting a lot more familiar personally with the polarized approach. And we'll have our discussion of how we're going to continue to use the polarized approach to improve my performance, which I'm so excited for next year already, even though it's just ended. I'm so excited. Well, we still have a few more races this year, but I'm excited for Toad next year. So let me ask you this, because I think where Carlos was trying to explain to me is that if I commit my brain to doing this and working hard at the right times and using my matches in the right order, that I could do this. Now, you're not going to hurt my feelings, but when you look at my numbers over the past couple months we've been working together, do you feel like I could do an effort, even sitting in with Carlos, that he pulled off here?
Yes, I truly think.
Man, you guys are making things hard. All right.
I truly think that you could get in a move like that and stay in it to the finish. I don't think you could drive a move like that, but it takes a special kind of rider to drive a move like that and normalize 380, 400 watts for 5-10 minutes, and then go another half an hour and then win the sprint at the end. There's one or two guys in the field who are that strong. But for someone like you with your power profile, you definitely have the jump to get in the move. You have a good 3 to 5 minute VO2 max power to kind of do threshold and get in that move, establish that move. And then you do have that good sweet spot base where you're comfortable kind of being slightly uncomfortable for a long time, where you could stay in there and then maybe having a kick at the end to beat a couple riders in this sprint.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I guess you're not letting me off easy. So I feel like maybe I'm the last person to believe that it's possible, which is probably not how things should work out for me. I got to change my mind.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks, Zach. I appreciate you joining us. This is fantastic. And I just want to thank Carlos again. Please like, subscribe, comment on the video. Let me know your thoughts on brake psychology, physical. What are your, what could you do to join that brake next time in one of your races? So, all right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.